Hi guys, Jason here. Welcome back to the channel. If you're a first time viewer, this channel is all about tube amps, mainly in the Marshall style, and we talk about how to mod them, how they work, how to build them from scratch, the whole thing. So if you're a first time viewer and you're interested in that, do subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to be notified of new content. Today we are looking at a 1978 JMP 2203. This amp came in for a full service and the Jake E. Lee mod treatment. It's safe to say that the amp was not really at its peak when it came in. Today in the clip, right, as well as going through a few tones, we will spend some time going through the amp, and I'll take you through it from go to woe in terms of the process I went through to restore this thing, bring it back to peak performance, and also implement the Jake E. Lee mods, which I have featured before on this channel, right? So the focus of today is really going to be about kind of restoring something like this and some of the issues that you face when you pull open an amp from the 1970s, right? Because they are never stock. Open this up, have a look. It's always interesting, right, when you crack open one of these older amps. They've always been modded. I'm yet to open one up that has been completely untouched. Let's just flip it around. Someone has written their name and mobile number on the back of an amp. Don't put your name on it like that. Not a vintage amp like this. Put it on your Jet City or whatever, right? Not on a 1979 JMP. Hardwired at 16 ohms, so there's something going on with the impedance selector here. It's obviously had a problem with it, so someone's just hardwired it at 16, so we probably need to replace that, actually. And I can see the mains, it's probably been hardwired at 240, is my guess, which is kind of okay, given the part of the world that we're in. Let's open it up, see what's cooking. Okay, so we've got it out of the chassis. Everything looks pretty clean. This filter cap here looks like it's been replaced. The original, these all look original. This one is an ARS cap that looks like it's been replaced. Everything else looks pretty clean. Pull this out, what have we got here? Unmarked, which makes me suspect it's probably a Chinese, out of a China factory, which is all good.
what have we got here? These are mallards. Okay, made in Russia. Let's flip it over. Just flicked it over. Just been looking at this thing for about a minute, and here's my observations. First up, this is the standard 10K cold clipper second cathode, right? So on these 2203s like this, V1B is actually the first gain stage. So you can see coming from the input jacks, right, this black coax comes into V1B, and there should be a 2K7 cathode here with a 0.68 microfarad bypass. That all looks unmolested, stock. Then we come into the second gain stage, 10K. Now someone's put another 10K resistor in parallel, so this is a 5K second cathode now. So you can get more gain, but it changes the changes the sound of a stock 2203 in the direction we're taking this anyway, right? Which is the JEL100 mod, which is we'll actually want this at 2K7 actually, but I'm just making comments here with respect to stock amp. Okay, so that's been added. These two plate resistors here, 100K aside, they've been replaced, and it looks like they've been done just by clipping off the old ones and soldering those new ones onto the legs that are left. Again, that prevents you needing to lift the board out. It's quite a common technique in working on these ST1 boards without having to get underneath the board. Someone's put a cap here, it's a silver mica cap between the plate and the cathode on the first gain stage, so that's knocking out some very high end. Maybe this amp was oscillating and someone's trying to take some brightness out of it perhaps, but that would be very, very high frequencies. So this looks stock, although, well, it's stock components, but someone's put some heat shrink and so on, and that's not normally done like that. No bright cap on this amp, which is a crying shame. How can you have a 2203 with no bright cap? I mean, come on, seriously. All of this pot wiring, that's all been replaced, I'm sure of it. That's not stock. Stock is just normal, unshielded wiring. This resistor here has been replaced. It's 100K, so that's that's the cathode resistor on the cathode follower, which should be 100K. So I suspect that had floated away. This 100K resistor here is also being replaced. If you have a look at my restoring my 1987 JCM800, you'll see that I had one of the original resistors here. It had drifted to 900K, which is why when I got the amp it sounded like crap. So I suspect that over its life this one had something similar happen to it, so that's replaced. That makes sense to me. Moving along, this all looks stock. Someone's replaced the bias dropping resistor. Presence cap is 0.47 microfarad. Now, it should be 0.1 in these. So it looks like an old cap. So if it was modded, that was actually done a long time ago, or someone used, a period correct cap to do the mod. Just looking at these tube sockets again, I'm sure they've been replaced. Someone's put 1 ohm resistors in here to ground so you can measure bias with your multimeter. That is definitely not a stock feature in a Marshall 2203. So I reckon all those tube sockets have actually been replaced. They don't look, looking at them more closely now, they do not look stock. These plastic bases here are also not stock. Yeah, so I reckon all those sockets have been replaced, just maybe over wear and tear and maintenance. I'm going to reverse out some of this stuff that probably unnecessary. We're going to put a bright cap on. We're going to change this cathode. We're going to do the JEL on this thing. So I've been looking at the wiring of this impedance selector. Now, on the back of the amp, right, it's got a label that says hardwired at 16 ohms. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, what can I do about this? Because the owner of this amp wants to be able to use it at 8 ohms. And so I've kind of been looking at it and thinking, oh, okay, so what's going on here? Now, two things which I think are kind of funny, right? And not funny as in weird. I mean funny as in hilarious. It's hardwired at 4 ohms. Right, this is a diagonal output transformer. Brown, here it is, here's the brown. Brown wire on the secondary of the OT is going to ground. Okay, the black is 4 ohms, and this purple wire is our negative feedback tap. Okay, which is not stock, well, not original. Got the right colour, but certainly not an original wire. Yellow is 8, green is 16 ohms. You can even take your meter and you can measure the DC resistance to ground, or to, you know, to the common on each of these three things, and you can see it's only in points of an ohm, right? So in tenths of an ohm, DC resistance is very low, but it's observable. So here I'm going from the brown to the black. Okay, 0.2 to the yellow, 0.3, and to the green, 0.4. Okay, so 4, 8, 16. Now, in terms of wiring to these, to the speaker here, here's the black wire to the tip of the speaker jack. It goes to the middle of the impedance selector here, as you'd expect, but then the switch, which is glued in or something, I don't know, like, it can't come out, right? It's actually fixed. You can see what it's attached to, because when I move it, you can see it's moving the black and the middle. You know, this just never ceases to amaze me. It's got a label on the back that says 16 ohms. It's hardwired to 4. That's not good, right? And then the wiring on these two speaker jacks, crazy. Someone in the comments will probably say, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Well, I haven't. So these are switched cliff jacks. Okay, so when there's nothing plugged in, there's a connection across the tip and a connection across, well, these have got a sleeve and a ring, right? But if you look closely, if there's enough resolution on the video here, you can see that they cross. So the tip of this jack crosses across to the ground on the other, which means that when there's nothing plugged in, the output transformer secondary is fully grounded, right? So obviously the common on the secondary wind is grounded, but this will be grounded as well, which means the entire coil on the secondary side of your output transformer is grounded, which I guess, you know, with this, normally it would be open circuit, right? If you've got nothing plugged in, it'll be open circuit. This means it's fully grounded. Now, is that going to do anything to save your output transformer and or your power tubes if you turn this on and play through it with the volume up with no speaker jack plugged in? No. I don't think it's making any difference at all, to be honest. The primary side of your output transformer is still going to be pushing into no load. So yeah, I reckon if this was a thing that saved output transformers, you'd see it on every amp, every modern day amp. So yeah, weird. So in terms of resolving this mess, here's what I'm going to do. I've just checked with the owner, And what we're going to do, because these old impedance selectors really hard to come by now, and they're also very unreliable, right? So, you know, the reason that this would have been permanently set in here is because these switches fall out. You can just pull them out, right? And then you do have an open load or no load condition on your output transformer, and you know, goodbye output transformer, or power tubes if you're lucky. So I'm going to remove all this crap, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to set up one of these speaker jacks as a 16 ohm dedicated output, and this one as a dedicated 8 ohm output. So I'll be wiring the secondaries from the output transformer directly to these speaker jacks, and the impedance selector won't be connected to anything anymore. And I'll rip that label off the back, and we'll label the two outputs as 16 and 8. Be nice and safe, right? Permanently wired, and at least we get to use the 16 and the 8 tap as appropriate. It always takes longer than what you think. Anyway, let's go through what I've done, because I found another issue with the amp that I have resolved. So I'll just step through from this side to this side, and I'm going to cover the mods and any restoration work that I have taken, or that I've carried out, I should say. So 3.3K, 3K3 resistor here in parallel with my 10K. It's an effective cathode of 2.5, close enough to 2K7, right? And that's a 0.68 microfarad bypass cap sitting underneath it. Okay, so there's my 2K7 with 0.68. You know, it's nice to do it this way. You leave the original 10K in here. Look, you know, these amps have got years and years ahead of them. Someone might want to just return it back to completely stock. And in that regard, I left the 22 nanofarad coupling cap. Sorry, this one, I should say. This is the first coupling cap here. I left that in place, and you can see off the orange wire here, which comes in to the low input jack, I've inserted a 2.2 nanofarad. So in series, I've got 2 nanofarad here. It's close enough, right? Close enough to 2.2 nano, and within 10%. That way, you know, I've knocked the bass out of the preamp, which is what I wanted to do by using a 2.2 nanofarad, and I didn't have to pull the board out, and I've left that stock. Again, this makes all this reversible, right? If you want to take this back to, you know, a genuine 1978 2203. Got a 1 nanofarad bright cap back in place here. It's a ceramic. I've got my 220k resistor from the pot's input to the ground. Okay. Moving through, I've got my 22 microfarad electrolytic cap sitting on top of the 820 ohm third gain stage cathode resistor. Okay. I got my 470 picofarad. It's another ceramic cap here. Over the 100k cathode resistor on the cathode follower. That dumps some high end to ground. Now, I had to replace, these are the plate resistors for the phase inverter. Now, it's 82k and 100k. This 82k was measuring about 100, and this 100k was measuring 160k. Right, so these old resistors, these old Marshalls, whenever you get one, or you know, if you've got one, get your meter and just go through and check all the resistances. They drift all over the joint, and you know, if you want to get this amp back to peak performance, you want to check that kind of stuff out. So let's have a look at this. This is where I've kind of cleaned up what was going on with this impedance selector and the output. The 4 ohm tap of the OT is left on the switch. It's connected to nothing. Got my 16 ohm tap hardwired to this speaker jack, and I've got my 8 ohm hardwired to this speaker jack, right? So I'll label them on the outside. This will be your 8 ohm input, this will be your 16. Impedance selector does nothing. And then here I've got my fixed depth, all right? So 220k resistor with a 4N7 cap in parallel, and then to the negative feedback. I've gone off the 8 ohm because this has got a 100k negative feedback resistor on the board. Now, when we normally do this mod, I'd take this off a 4 ohm tap with a 47k resistor. So 8 ohm off 100, it's about the same amount of negative feedback. Okay. Now, we still do have the 0.47 microfarad presence cap sitting in there, but I'm just going to try the amp with that in. No harm. Might be a nice surprise. That. Other than that, I think we're ready to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to power this amp on, and I'm going to check the bias. Once that all checks out, then I'll crank a guitar through it and see what we got. So Mark, you hear that thumping? Yeah. So the volume's off, right, completely. I'm going straight into that cab. It's a 2x12 there. And I was running this through my rack down here, right? And I could hear it coming through. And I thought, what the hell's that? So it's probably the power tubes, mate, or potentially one of these filter caps, because there is one that's been replaced here. So mate, I'll continue, don't panic, right? I'll continue troubleshooting and we'll get to the bottom of it. Just wanted to let you know that we've got that thump there. So in terms of getting this thing kind of back to full health, I had to replace all of the tubes in it, right? So that thumping sound that you've just heard in the little clip that I sent to Mark, the owner of this amp, that was solved by replacing all 4 power tubes. As soon as I replaced those and rebiased the amp, problem went away. But I still noticed that, compared to my 1980 JMP, where I've done the same JEL100 mod, and again, I've featured that amp on a previous video where I actually did the JEL100 mod to my own JMP and showed you how to do it. It just didn't sound as good, right? It sounded, it's like, wow, something's still wrong with this. It was the preamp tubes. I replaced one by one. I replaced V1, V2, V3, and all of them were subpar, right? So, it's the old lesson, right? If your amp's sounding bad, pretty good chance that the preamp tubes, or the power tubes, or both, may need replacing. In the preamp position, I'm using these now. This is the Electro Harmonics 7025, right? So I was using the Chinese B preamp tube, but ever since that factory's burnt down or gone, closed down or whatever has happened to it, very, very hard to get. In fact, impossible to get. I've still got a stash, but I'm keeping those for special occasions. I'm using these now. Fantastic tubes, right? Haven't had an issue with them. So this amp's now got these in it, and I'm using the JEL100s in this amp too, so a brand new set in there. Alright guys, well that's all for today. I'll see you next time.